Adam and the One-to-One team for giving us the opportunity to speak here today. I'm going to provide a brief update on the rare earths market, starting to look at recent price movements before turning our focus to the sort of supply and demand dynamics that have been impacting the industry recently, and then I'll move things slightly longer term. So just to kick things off, usual disclaimer information. So, when looking at rare earth prices, I think it's safe to say that they've been through a particularly volatile period over the past 12 months. Since peaking in March 2022, the key magnet rare earths, so the likes of NdPr and Dy as shown on the graphs here, have really experienced a significant downturn, falling by as much as 48% since their peak to current levels. Now, this has been down to two primary reasons, and firstly, the direct state involvement from the Chinese government to lower prices, and secondly, the weakening of market sentiment within the Chinese domestic market. Now, on that second point, there are a number of contributing factors, such as the global economic uncertainty, the COVID-19 related lockdowns impacting on the automotive production facilities within China. And this all contributed to a sort of weakening demand image, while simultaneously the announcement earlier on in the year to increase the supply production quotas alleviated some of the supply tightness, particularly on the light rare earth side. Now, in expectation of lower prices, we had a sort of a chicken and egg situation where suppliers were looking to lower their prices to offload their inventories in expectation of lower prices, while simultaneously the consumers were using up their inventories instead of purchasing on the stock market. So this really led to sort of the hand and mouth ordering system instead of the placement of longer term orders. Looking at rare earth demand, the key point I want to take away from this slide is just the level of integration within the facility, and this is particularly focusing on China. So the chart here on the right-hand side is comparing the export of rare earth compounds and permanent magnet material from China. And as you can see with the two colours, the dark blue lines here are referencing the rare earth compounds. You can see that the monthly exports have really sort of settled around the 4-year average. While when looking at the export of permanent magnet material, particularly since the mid-2020s, you can see there's a bit of a disconnect, and suddenly permanent magnet material exports are much higher than the 4-year average. And this just really highlights the level of integration within the Chinese domestic market, where they have full access and exposure across the entire value chain, and the likes of CNRE being able to produce right the way through from mined material all the way down to MRI scanners if they need to. Another important point to note here is the level of internal competition within China has really sort of influenced this level of integration. So particularly in sort of the Baotao region, where local incentives and sort of cheaper energy costs has really tried to wrestle some of that control from other regions. And this level of internal competition has really helped these companies expand right across the value chain. So just looking at rare earth supply briefly, at both the mined and refined stages, supply has increased this year, with the former increasing around about 17% compared to 2021, whereas refined production has increased just over 14%. Of course, earlier on in the year, the Chinese government released their latest batch of production quotas, and as you can see from the various charts, there is sort of a few key takeaways. Firstly, it was an increase again, a 25% increase in 2022, following a large increase from the previous year as well, although this was entirely derived and assigned to the light rare earth. So as you can see from the charts on the right-hand side, which compare the hard rock, which is the light rare earths, and the ion absorption clays at the bottom, which is your heavy rare earths, you can see that it's the light rare earth production quota which has received all of this production increase, whereas the heavy rare earths have been maintained. Secondly, an important point to note is the level of consolidation within the Chinese market. And previously, there were 6 state-owned enterprises, and this has been recently consolidated down to 4. And this production increase, as you can see from the chart on the left-hand side, was almost entirely assigned to China Northern, where there were sort of minor increases to the China Rare Earth Group as well. Just taking a moment to look a little bit more in depth at the Chinese market in particular, and just sort of following on from my previous slide, the graphic here on the right-hand side really highlights just how there are sort of two primary production centres forming, and looking at the distribution of the mining quotas, you can see China Northern, obviously in the north, focusing primarily on the light rare earth production, and the China Rare Earth Group in the southern provinces really focusing on that heavy rare earth production. Now, it hasn't all been smooth sailing, particularly on the heavy rare earth side within China. So, following the state-led crackdown in 2016, where sort of unregulated mining practices were really, I suppose, halted and suspended, we've seen a number of movements to increase on the mining side for heavy rare earths, but the trouble with that is sort of the disruptions that are currently impacting on the refined side, and this is really sort of shackling the heavy rare earths industry currently. So one of the primary movements from this is the sort of the transition away from the traditional ammonium sulfate reagents to more of a magnesium sulfate reagent, and this has had sort of variable recovery results, and this is really disrupting sort of the ramp up and the reopening of these refining facilities. So shifting our focus slightly longer term now, I just want to take a few slides to highlight the main opportunities going forward and what the outlook for the earth industry could be. So of course, it's difficult to get away from the hot topic of the energy transition, but rare earths really does sit at the centre of that. And as you can see here, the growth within the magnet applications is expected to really drive this industry going forward. Traditionally, the catalyst industry, so your auto cats and your FCC cats for petroleum fuel products, was the largest demand driver in rare earths. However, in recent years, magnets has really taken over, and going forward, there's really only one winner. Within the magnets industry, I have a couple of slides later on just touching on the main drivers, but as you can see, to achieve a CAGR of 5.7% over the coming years, it's really the automotive drivetrain applications and your offshore wind, which are your larger magnets, that are going to be the primary drivers. Within the catalyst industry, of course, the sort of the falling sales of internal combustion engines is going to have a negative impact longer term. In the next few years, we expect the intensity of use of rare earths within these internal combustion engines to kind of offset the impact of falling sales. However, longer term, the catalyst industry is expected to decline. On the flip side of that, so for FCC catalysts, the lower demand for petroleum fuel products from industrial applications as well as automotive applications is also going to have a negative impact, thus lowering demand in longer term. So just having a bit of a deeper dive on the sort of the two main factors within the magnets industry. This slide here looks at the automotive applications, and the chart on the left-hand side, really the key takeaway is just the sort of the rapid increase from the red line here showing battery electric vehicle penetration rates. And as you can see from the dark blue columns, over the next decade or so, sort of their market share really is going to grow quite significantly from around about sort of 7% currently up to 27% over the next decade. When you translate this into NdFeB demand from automotive applications, you can really see that, of course, the global trend is increasing, but China is the main driving force. The likes of Europe and North America will also have a significant role, and this has encouraged the NdFeB demand really to ramp up quite significantly over the next few years. It's important to note that sort of the chart on the right-hand side is only looking at sort of your drivetrain applications. There are also a number of other smaller magnets within vehicles, so the likes of fuel pumps, power steering, small clasps, heat motors for your seats. So it's this is only part of the picture of the automotive industry. Swapping to look at sort of the wind energy demand, which is really seen to be a key to sort of wrestle that reliance on fossil fuel energy generation. As you can see from the chart on the left-hand side, offshore wind is expected to really increase quite rapidly over the next few years, and the recent energy crisis within Europe has only, I suppose, encouraged that development from European nations, particularly Germany and the UK and the Netherlands in the Northern Europe states, where we've seen really rapid development of securing land packages for these offshore wind projects. When you look at how this sort of moves into NdFeB demand, and the chart in the bottom right here, the key point of the graph to focus on is the light blue columns at the bottom, and how although demand is expected to remain relatively subdued over the next couple of years, just given sort of the time it takes to establish these facilities, you can really see sort of beyond 2025, towards the end of the decade, sort of demand from these offshore wind energy applications is expected to increase rapidly, almost fivefold over the next 10 years. Just taking a look at sort of how supply is going to be able to respond to this rising demand picture in the future, and I've just sort of broken down the key three key stages here with mined, refined and recycled, and showed sort of the level of Chinese production within each part of the supply chain. Of course, the first point to note is that China is the dominant force across the supply chain, although upstream in mine supply is more diverse, particularly within the pipeline developing projects. It is diverse in terms of geography and mineralogy. So as you can see from the percentages on the right-hand side, it's looking to fall to around about 55%, which is, of course, still a dominant position. For the reasons I outlined earlier, as you move further downstream, particularly within this space, China becomes increasingly more dominant. So within the refined production, they're looking at around about 80–85% of current production, and almost the entire recycled supply chain as well. Now, across the suite, supply is expected to increase rapidly over the next few years, with a number of developing projects at all stages looking to come online, not just within the Chinese market, but also rest of world as well. You can see that the refined supply, particularly in sort of the mid-2020s, there's quite a significant drop-off in the sort of percentage of Chinese-derived production, and this can be explained by a number of development projects, particularly within Australia, North America, and some other European operations as well. We really expect recycled supply to be an increasingly important source of material going forwards, and there are a number of reasons why this is an incredibly, I suppose, young but growing stage of the industry. So I know this slide looks a little bit busy, but I'll walk you through sort of just the key points I want to make here. And the chart in the top left-hand corner here just shows the percentage of rare earth production from refined and recycled sources. And you can see it's only a growing picture for recycled supply throughout the outlook period. Now, currently, the majority, or I suppose almost the entirety of recycled supply feedstock is derived from swarf material. So that's sort of offcuts and grinding media manufactured during magnet manufacturing. However, longer term, and we're talking sort of beyond 2035, end-of-life material. So this is magnets from EVs, from wind turbines, from other smaller applications, is really expected to become an increasingly important source of material, helping to sort of facilitate that growth. Now, currently, there's a bit of a disconnect across the industry where so there's a lack of consideration in component design for recycling flow sheets, and this has meant that the uses of epoxy resins and plastic housings really makes the magnet extraction from components quite challenging, and this is quite detrimental to recycling flow sheets. So, as I say, there's a bit of a grace period at the moment where sort of technological challenges are going to have to be overcome over the next decade or so in order to really take advantage of that increasing material availability longer term. Just looking at the sort of regional distributions here, currently China, of course, is by far the largest producer of rare earths from recycled material, and this is just due to the the control over the sort of magnet manufacturing industry and giving them access to this swarf material. And although other regions, particularly North America and Europe, will increase their market share longer term, we expect this part of the industry to remain largely China-centred. Just a few concluding remarks, which I'll leave on the slide for you here, but the key points to take away is that it's an incredibly significant time in the rare earth industry where demand is expected to go through quite a rapid growth, particularly over the next 10 to 15 years. There's an awful lot of supply challenges in order to meet this, but it's an increasingly sort of diverse and energetic market, so it's a great place to be over the next few years.
Thank you very much, Ross. Do we have any questions immediately based on those?